Okay, so today we will start at least chapter two. We may finish it, but we'll at least get started on chapter two. And also, we're going to have our first Excel assignment today. And so I'll send out an announcement. I'd like to have plenty of time to work on it, but basically, what you're going to be doing is following along with what I'm doing. There's an example in the slides that is an excellent place for us to get started learning Excel. So we'll be working on that today. And then you'll almost certainly want to practice with your calculator whenever an opportunity presents itself. So keep in mind, since we're doing this online, you don't really need the calculator, but when you get to stats two, you'll probably need to use it on a regular basis. So I would say that the more you learn about the TI-84 now, the better off you'll be. So as we go along, I'll tell you how to enter the correct information into the TI-84 to get your results. All right, so let's get started. What is this chapter two all about? God, I've got so much stuff open. Here it is. Chapter two, part A. There's two parts to this chapter. You'll see that on Blackboard. As a matter of fact, while we're thinking about Blackboard, let me just mention that if you go over there, I've been able to organize all of our materials into folders. And right now we're looking at the folder for chapter two. So you'll see that there are two sets of PowerPoint slides here, 2A and 2B. And here, this is the template for this Excel spreadsheet that we'll be doing today, and it's called Soft Drink. And, it's just a bunch of raw data that we're going to turn into some meaningful results, okay? So over here on the left, you can see that what we have here is brands of soda, and we're going to organize them by the end of the chapter, and we'll also get some interesting results from it. So anyway, what we're going to do here is summarize our data in a very useful way so we can see at a glance what the data are telling us. So, of course, let's remember that we were introduced last time to the concept of quantitative data, which is numerical data. We also have non-numerical data, or here they're calling it categorical data. These are labels or names. In other words, these are there just to identify what a variable is. Like in this case, clearly these sodas will be, or brands are categorical data because they are words rather than numbers. Okay. All right. Anyway, we're going to introduce some special graphs that are often used to help us visualize what a set of data are telling us. And they are, as you can see, a frequency distribution, a relative frequency distribution, a percent frequency distribution, and then a bar chart and a pie chart. So we've already actually seen some of these in the first chapter. So the question becomes, which one makes the most sense? Well, it depends on what kind of data you have and what you're trying to find out from it. So we start with a frequency distribution, which is simply a table showing our information organized into several types of categories, or sometimes they're called classes. And of course, the whole idea here is that when you look at this frequency distribution, you'll be able to see at a glance some of the key properties of the data, which would not be so obvious if you were looking at the raw data, especially if there's a lot of it. It's very difficult to make sense out of a huge chunk of data. So that's why these types of graphs are so very helpful. So here's the information. Now, of course, we have it set up in our spreadsheet in a column. Over here, by the way, I do want to point out that in our spreadsheet, we actually have 50 observations. Here, they're only showing us 20 of them because, that's all the room they have. So, but this is what it looks like. We have all the brands are either Coca-Cola, Diet Coke, Dr. Pepper, or Pepsi. It looks like that's all and there's also Sprite in there. Okay. So this is what we want. And you can see just by looking at this frequency distribution, it's obvious just by glancing at it for a second that Pepsi is the most popular flavor in this group, or the one that occurs the most often, and Sprite is the least. So how do we set this up in Excel? Now here, you notice they're giving us all the help we need. If you go back to your spreadsheet, what we're going to do, So this is what you'll be doing for your assignment, by the way. When it's done, you can save it and email it to me. And I'll mention that in my announcement. I'll set a due date probably this weekend when the first MindTap assignments are due. So what you're going to do is, let's see, we can leave this here. Let's add a new category. Now that's interesting. They're not using column B. I don't know exactly why, but all right, let's oh, I see what they've done. In column C, they're just listing all 5 of them. Okay. And then we're going to start with Coca-Cola, Diet Coke, Dr. Pepper, Pepsi, oops, and then Sprite. Now, what we want to do here is summarize the number of times each of these brands occurs in our data set here. So we're going to call that frequency. And so you might think, well, this is going to take a while. I mean, if you had to do this yourself, imagine how long it would take. You have to scan through all of this data and say, all right, how many Coca-Colas are there? 1, 2, 3, 4. It would take forever, and the chances of making a mistake are essentially 100%. It's a tough thing to do. So instead, Excel has a special command called COUNTIF. And what it basically says is, listen, count the number of times you see this variable in the data set. So now if you notice, when you type a command in Excel, it types underneath or puts underneath it this little ribbon. And if you notice, it's trying to help you understand how this command works. It says COUNTIF range, comma, criteria. So that means you're going to tell it first, where are the data that we're looking at? And then what are we looking for? So the range would be these numbers right here, A2 through A51. Now, you can type that directly, but here we're not going to do that because this is information that will not change no matter where we have our frequency. The data is still staying in column A. So we don't want those cell references to change. So we're going to introduce or enter it as A2. But if you notice, I'm using $ to lock in that reference so that no matter where I copy this information, it won't change. All right, so that's very important. Those $ are a huge deal in Excel because if you want to copy commands to other cells without changing those cell references, you must use $. Now, the next thing we're going to do is introduce the concept of a range. I want everything from A2 all the way up to and including A51. So I'll indicate that with a colon, and then I'll type A51. Okay, and if you notice, Excel is saying, here's what you just chose. So that way I know, oh yeah, this is what I meant. Perfect. That's even the same color. Look at that. Now the comma is necessary to separate it from the next piece of information, which is what are you looking for? Now here's where you have to really watch it. When you're using non-numerical data like this, you've got to make sure that in column C, the names of the brands are typed in exactly, and I mean exactly the same way as they are in column A. If there's a typo in here somewhere, it will not find what you're looking for. So you want to keep an eye on that. So the criteria is this brand right here that we're looking at, Coca-Cola. Now, I don't want to have to type the words Coca-Cola if I can avoid it. I could, but even then I'm risking making typos. So instead, the strategy is to put the cell reference C2. And again, Excel is trying to help you by saying, I put that in red to make sure you understand what you just selected. Now, if you notice, the C2 doesn't have any $ because I'm going to drag this command down, and I want that C2 to change to C3 in this cell. Okay. which is exactly what happened, but I don't want the A2 through A51 to change because that's a fixed set of data. So the second entry in this function is the one that I do want it to change. So I do not put in any dollar signs. Now, one of the great things about Excel is if you set up these commands correctly, I don't have to type it more than once. All I have to do is grab here. So did you see that little plus? Now on the PC, this is the left mouse button. I don't know what that means on the Mac, but you drag it down and there is your results. Now to make sure we didn't goof it up, we can add these up. If it doesn't add up to 50, you know something's wrong, okay? So the command for adding up is equals sum, and then you add these up. You tell it to add up the contents of cells D2 through D6. Notice the colon means from 2. And yes, there's 50. So it appears that we've got them all. All right, so that is our frequency distribution for this particular data set. Oh, yes, and they also recommend you use the sum. Now, see, now their results are different because they're using, remember, only 20. We're using 50. So that is our frequency. Right here, this little table is our frequency distribution. Now, from here, we can create all kinds of interesting graphs because even a frequency distribution, if there's enough rows here, gets unwieldy after a while. If you had 100 rows there, for example, you might find it difficult to quickly find the largest value or the smallest. Okay, so that's where the graphs come in. We know that it's easier to spot things from a graph than from looking at raw data. Right? Our eyes or our brains or whatever are set up to respond quickly to pictures, pictorial information, much more quickly than numbers. Anyway, so now we'd like to think in terms of what's called the relative frequency, which simply means what proportion of the total does this represent? Okay, in other words, these are the raw totals. But sometimes that's not what I'm after. I need to know, for example, what proportion of these brands are Coca-Cola or Diet Coke or whatever. So the way to do that is to take the frequency of an individual class. Remember, these are being referred to as classes. I'll mention this over here because it might come in handy when you're doing your MindTap assignment. Each brand, and you don't have to do this part. This is for your benefit. So you can see each brand in this frequency distribution is considered to be a class. Okay. Now, if we were dealing with numbers, like what if these were ages, for example, or prices or something like that, then you would have ranges of numbers. But here instead, we have labels as they're called. Okay. All right. Now, the relative frequency then is the actual or absolute frequency divided by this number right here. So you're going to take each of these individually and divide by the grand total. Now, this is cell D7. We don't want that to ever change. So that one requires dollar signs. And then I can drag this down. So now I can look at it and say, oh, yeah, Coca-Cola represents 38% of the total. Dr. Pepper and Sprite are at 10%. Okay, now, what if I don't want proportions like this, but percentages? We're just going to multiply by 100. So we'll have another column for our table, percent frequency. Which means all you're doing is multiplying this number by 100. All right. Sometimes people prefer percentages to proportions. It's fine. Either way, you're getting the same results. Okay, and that's what it's supposed to look like with our data, not their data. All right. Now, what kind of graphs could we use to represent this information? Well, we have the bar chart, which we've already seen an example of. We have on the horizontal axis, we have the labels, meaning the classes are listed on the horizontal axis. On the vertical axis, we'll have the frequencies. And with the bar chart, the heights of the bars will represent those frequencies. So like this would be an example of what a bar chart would look like here. And you can see, again, just by looking at it really quickly, that Coca-Cola clearly is the most frequent element in this data set, closely followed by Pepsi. And then you can see that Dr. Pepper and Sprite are tied for the lowest. So how do you do this? Well, we're going to select the data. And if you wanted to use the relative or percent frequencies, you could certainly do that. But for this bar chart, we're going to choose the absolute frequencies. And then you can do it in a couple of ways. You can go to insert. And by the way, I'm pretty confident that almost everything we're doing here is exactly the same on the Mac. I'm not an expert in the Mac and I don't use the Mac, but I know from past experience in the classroom where most of the students seem to have Macs. I ask them all the time about this and they all tell me that it's pretty much the exact same thing. So insert. Now, when we're getting started, you can just go to the recommended charts and see if they have one. If you already know what you're doing, you could come over here and ask for the bar chart yourself, and you'll see there's a bunch of options there. But for now, we'll stick with the recommended charts. And what do you know? The very first one on top is the one we were hoping to find. Perfect. Now, once you have your bar chart, like with all Excel charts, there are many, many ways to adjust it, update it, make it look nicer. But you see across the bottom, as we predicted, the classes are listed on the bottom. The frequencies are on the vertical axis, and the heights represent the frequencies. What if I decide, nah, let's call this soft drinks or something like that? There's all kinds of things you can do. And if you really feel very artistic, you can change the colors of the bars, you can change the shape, you can change all kinds of things. Okay. Like if you want to change the colors, say I want red. What do you know? Oh my God, that was so nice. it it makes no difference. You don't have to do that part. Okay. And by the way, anytime in Excel you want to you change your mind, the command for undo is just this little backward arrow. It's like, let's go back in time and undo that. There you go. Okay. There's other styles for this chart. There's a lot of stuff we could do. So for now, this is our basic bar chart. It does the job. And you could actually copy this into an PowerPoint slide and use it as a presentation. So if you're in Gabelli down the road, you'll be doing presentations. There's a class you have to take called, I think, Business Communications or something like that. And you'll be doing presentations, although I don't know for a fact that you're allowed to use PowerPoint, but if you are, you can copy all this wonderful information directly into your PowerPoint slides, and then that would be very, very helpful for your presentation. Anyway, so that's how it was done. Now, here, by the way, they're briefly mentioning this this thing you're seeing here, something called a pivot table. We're going to sort of gloss over that for now. Pivot tables have their place, but they're horribly complicated. They're extremely, in my opinion, confusing. So we're only going to use them when it's absolutely necessary. Right now, what we have is fine. Then we have our old friend, the pie chart. You may have seen these before. The pie is set up so that the slices represent proportions or percentages. So you saw before when we were looking for the bar chart in the recommended charts, there is a pie chart in there too. Although there's many different ways, there's many options. Yeah, now you can see they're labeled down here. And here they're labeled in the pie. So what you now for those options, let me just change this again to soft drinks. So if you notice, while you have this selected, if you come up to the top and look at chart design, if you're not happy with the design of your pie, there's all these other options here. Ooh, that was kind of nice. I don't know if that's one of them. Oh, yeah, yeah, I see, but then the colors are ugly. Well, anyway, so the one we started out with is perfectly fine. Just be aware that there's other choices. There might still be a way to label them the way we want. There are sometimes ways of customizing these graphs, but I don't really know exactly what we would do. Um, if it's really important to get it to look exactly like this, you could probably go to the internet and find the instructions. All right. And again, you can see by looking at it that the big blue slice is Coca-Cola. That's the most common. The less this teal, I guess, and this green one are the least common in our data set. I, this kind of the pie chart is good for qualitative data, um, like flavors and colors, like we mentioned the other day, Apple trying to decide what colors to make the new phones in. They might look at the surveys that they've gotten and then they put them together in a big pie chart, and they want to look at it and say, well, which ones do people want? Which ones do they not really care about? But for numerical data, you're much more likely to see bar charts. Okay. We'll see later on that the pattern of the bars can be very, very helpful or useful information with numerical data. But for non-numerical data like this, um, pie charts are fine. Anything that lets you see what you're doing is going to be very helpful compared to simply looking at a table like this. Okay, so now we're done analyzing qualitative data. In this case, that qualitative data represented brand names for sodas. Now we're going to look at numerical data, and you'll see that we're going to summarize it in a lot of the same ways, but because we're dealing with actual numbers, we have a lot more options now. So you can see the list of graphs that we could potentially use is quite long and extensive. So we're going to open up a new spreadsheet called Audit, and this is a small company. It's a small CPA firm where they audit their clients' accounts, and they take a sample of 20 clients. And what they're really interested in is analyzing how long it takes to audit the client's accounts. So we have 20 of them here. You can see the numbers are fairly small. They range from 12 to, it looks like the maximum was 33 minutes. So what we're going to do is take this information and once again turn it into a frequency distribution. But because we're dealing with numbers instead of brands, we do have some decisions to make about how we organize this data. So the first thing we might want to do is take a look at the numbers themselves. So what I'm going to do is insert a new column here. On the PC, that's right click of the mouse, insert. Then you'll do whatever's the equivalent on the Mac if you're using a Mac. I don't understand how the clicking works on a Mac, but I don't think the mouse on the Mac has both a left and a right button. I don't think they do, but I think everyone's using the trackpads anyway. So whatever's the equivalent of a right click on a Mac, you do that to get this column. And why am I doing this? Because I'd like to analyze the data a little bit before I decide what to do about my frequency distribution. So one little trick I want to show you here is that if you have a lot of data in a column, and it might be unwieldy to keep scrolling up and down and see what's in that column. What you can do is go to View, Split, and it produces this, right, you see this little gray line here. I can move it up here anywhere where I like. And what that has accomplished is that the top and the bottom are now two independent windows, and I can scroll them separately from each other. So I can do whatever I need to do down here without losing sight of the column header, okay, way up at the top there, as opposed to always going up and down all the time. So in order to set up this frequency distribution, there's a few details that I need to know. First of all, I need to know the minimum value in my column. And so it turns out the Excel command for that is min. And if you notice when you type what you think might be a command, it's going to show you a list of functions that it thinks you might want to choose from. And a little helpful hint on the side there, this little ribbon here is telling you what this function does. If you want it, you use your open parenthesis, and then this little ribbon is helping you by telling you, just tell me what numbers you want. And in this case, that would be the cells from B2 through B21. Now, if you notice in Excel, the range is indicated with a colon. Otherwise, I'd have to type B2, comma, B3, comma, all the way down to B21. We don't want that. So instead, we have a colon, which indicates give me all the cells between B2 and B21. And that happens to be 12, okay? Now, for the maximum, we're going to try something a little different. Suppose that you don't know if there is such a command in Excel, and you're like, well, I don't know what to do now. Besides just typing what you think might be the right spelling, there's this little button up here on the so-called formula bar called Insert Function. And if you click it on, you can use it to search for any functions that you need. And it comes back with suggestions. And it says, well, maybe you mean max. And then there's a description here. If that's the one you want, you hit OK. And then it's going to even help you more by asking you for the information that it wants, which in this case is B2 through B21. And we hit enter, and there it is. So now that means that the data ranges from 12 to 33. So when we set up our frequency distribution, we need to set it up or organize it into classes. Okay, now class is a range of values of some kind. In the case of the soda brands, each class was a brand. Okay, so Coke was a brand, Pepsi was a brand, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sorry, not a brand, it was a class. Okay, the brand was a class. But here we have numbers, we don't have brands. So we have to choose ranges of numbers to set up our frequency distribution. So what we'd like to do is set it up in such a way that it makes sense, that it's easy to see what the results mean. So what we'd like to do is choose the widths of the classes that we'll use for this particular frequency distribution. So what they recommend you do here is, first of all, they think you should probably not have more than 20 classes, or maybe less than 5, because if you have too few, you're not getting a lot of useful information out of that data. Same thing with too much. Somewhere in between is what we're looking for. So the range of values here is the difference between the maximum and the minimum, which there's no Excel command for that, so we'll just do it ourselves. 21. Okay, so why don't we do this? Let us decide that we want, I think in this example, the class width that they recommend depends on how many classes you want. So let's just say we've decided that we want 5 classes. Because there's not a whole lot of data here. If we had a ton of data and the range of possibilities was much wider, we might choose 10 classes or 15 or whatever. But because there's so little data, we'll stick with 5. And that means the class width, meaning how much information is in each class, is going to be the ratio of that range to the number of classes that we want. Okay, now 4.2 is the width, the ideal width. Now, this is not an integer, so we're not going to use 4.2, but we can certainly try 4. And now, normally what we try to do with classes like this, with ranges of values, is we try to start and end with even numbers, like don't start with 8 and end with 13 or something ridiculous like that. You might want to start with 10 and end with 15, and that kind of thing. Now here, what they recommend that we do is 10 to 14. In other words, we want to have 5 in each, actually 4, 10 to 14, because these must be integers, or we're assuming that they're integers. The data has been set up to only show whole numbers. That's an important detail, by the way. Well, if not, we'd have to do something a little bit different. But since they're all integers, they're going to have us set it up so that the time will range from 10 to 14. Oh, by the way, here's something you got to watch out for. And by the way, here's another thing to watch out for. I don't need this split anymore, or at least I don't think I do. So I'm going to get rid of it by double clicking. If I type 10 to 14 like that, it thinks I mean October 14th. So I'm going to write 10 to 14, 15 to 19. And by the way, this is completely arbitrary. I could put any classes I want here, but it looks like these will be the most helpful. And of course, not 34, 39, 34. So notice that all the classes have the same number of elements in them. In other words, the width is 5 in each case. All right. Well, actually, it's 4. Sorry. The difference between the largest and the smallest is 4. What am I saying? It's 4. So the class width is 4, meaning that the number of values, the range is from 10 to 14, which is a difference of 4, and the same is true for all of them. All right. We don't want them to be different from each other. Also, we have to make sure that they don't overlap with each other. So also we have to make sure that they cover all the possibilities. So we know that 12 is the minimum, so we don't need a smaller category than 10 through 14. We also know that 33 is the maximum, so we don't need another category up here. So anyway, this should do the job. So here we'll put our frequencies. Now, there's a lot of ways we can do this. For the time being, we're going to stick with a specialized command, which is a little bit time consuming, but it will work. And not count if. It's slightly different than that. It's called count if s. Now, I'm not quite sure what the s is supposed to stand for, but if you use this count if s command, it needs to know first where is the data that we're looking at. Now, that is equal to B2 through B21. Now I'm using dollar signs because I don't want that to ever change. Then I have to tell it what I'm looking for. So I want this class to include values that are greater than or equal to 10. Okay, now if you notice, I've had to put it in quotes. It won't understand it without the quotes. But I also need the numbers to be less than or equal to 14. This is not good enough. So I'll put count if fs. I'm sorry, I don't repeat that part. I repeat the range of data. And now for the second condition, I have less than or equal to 14. All right, so if you look at this very carefully, you'll see that I needed 4 pieces of information. The data, where's the data? What's the first criteria that I need? Again, where's the data? And then another criteria. Now, I could have as many criteria as I want, by the way. I could add a third condition that maybe I'm only interested in the even numbers or something ridiculous like that. So when I hit enter, now, unfortunately, often in Excel, when we drag a command down like that, it takes care of itself. But because of those quotes, we have to go in there and manually update it. This 10 now becomes 15, and this becomes 19. So this is one of the awkward things about this approach. Here, I've got to change it to 20 to 24. So this may not be the ideal way of doing this, but at least we know that it works. Here we have 25 up to 29. And then at the end, we have 30 to 34. Okay, so that's our frequency distribution. So you notice this is a lot messier than when we're dealing with qualitative data, where we have just, in that case, it was brands. And so we don't have to make any decisions. In that case, we just let one brand be one class. Here, we had to choose how wide to make the class based on the numbers that are in the data set. And then, of course, there's a lot of work involved with the Excel command. Now, of course, as always, we'll add this up just to make sure that we're not imagining things, and we want to make sure nothing got left out. There should be 20 of them. Good. And once that's done, we can certainly feel free to draw any graphs we might want. I think in this case, they're going to ask us for a bar chart. By the way, in the slides, they're giving you directions for using something called a pivot table. I think we're going to have to hold off on that for just a little bit longer. Pivot tables are very powerful, but they're extremely difficult to use. There's nothing the least bit user friendly about them. They're very awkward. I'm very annoying, to say the least. So we'll save that until it's absolutely necessary. And instead, we'll use this approach. And then, yeah, they're going to have us do the relative and percent frequencies that we did earlier. By the way, I'm going to show you another helpful trick here. You notice how these column headings are too narrow for what I'm typing? If you can widen them up by dragging the cell, the headers across. But if you don't want to do that, what you can do instead is you select the titles and use this command over here in the home menu, wrap text. See, now suddenly it looks nice, doesn't it? Yes. And then if you feel like making it really beautiful, you can, make it boldface, for example. So the relative means the ratio of each absolute frequency divided by the total, which is F7. Remember to use the dollar signs because we're going to drag that down. And then, of course, the percentage frequency is just this number times 100. Okay, so in so many cases, once you type a command or something in there, you should be able to drag it down and not have to repeat it many, many times. All right. Now, by the way, I'm going to show you another special trick. If you need to revisit and look at all the commands or functions that you used, look what I did here. The only annoying thing is that it makes all the columns very wide. But you can see all the formulas at once, which is sometimes very convenient. And you can print this out like this if you need to for reference purposes. How did I do this? Now, this is one of those rare things that's exactly the same in both the PC and the Mac. Most of the keyboard shortcuts are different. You're going to hit, I'll make a note of it here somewhere. Control. And then there's a special key that you probably never noticed in the upper left-hand corner. This little squiggle is known as tilde. It's just to the left of the one key. It's been sitting there all of your life waiting for you to use it. Well, now you get a chance to use it, tilde. So control tilde will toggle back and forth between showing all formulas and showing the data, okay? So in order to go back, you just hit Control tilde a second time. Now, of course, again, unfortunately, it does wreak havoc with the column widths, which I don't know why they can't fix that. But if you want to look at the individual formulas, on the PC, it's F2. I don't know what it is on the Mac. Okay, so this is a result. And so the purpose of all this was to show you how you could create a frequency distribution for quantitative data. And now we're going to go ahead and do some graphs like we did before. Oh, dot plot. Yeah, I'm not sure how helpful this is. And I'm pretty sure you can't do this in Excel. Now, here's an interesting twist. This graph will prove to be very important throughout the rest of statistics. It's called a histogram. And you can see, for all practical purposes, it's just a bar chart where the bars are right next to each other. So you probably think, well, there must be a separate choice. When you decide to graph something, insert charts, you would expect to find a histogram option in there, but it's not there. There's a workaround, though. Oops. It's not too terribly difficult. What you basically have to do is change the options for this bar chart and tell it that you don't want any space in between the bars. So I'm not sure if they have the instructions in here. Okay, here it is. Once you've got this done, format data series. I'm right-clicking it right now. Format data series. And what you're trying to do, there it is, gap width, change that to 0. Oh, okay. Well, that's awfully wide, isn't it? Um, oh, yes. And so one more thing. No, actually, no, it looks fine. I mean, the bars are kind of wide, but it's not bad. So I think you can ask it to put bars in between, though. Oh, no, it doesn't. Huh, that's a little surprising. You know, there might be other options in here that are not obvious. No, I guess that's all we can do. All right, it's fine. Normally you have the, you can see the lines between the bars, but I guess this is the best Excel can do. So anyway, you'll see as we go along in the course, much of the time we'll actually be using histograms rather than bar charts for our data, especially if there's a lot of categories, because there's certain properties that we can determine by looking at the pattern of the bars. Here, it's enough to notice that the most frequent occurrence here is 15 to 19, and the least frequent is 30 to 34. Okay. So, all right. So I think that's it for audit. Now, by the way, they're going to show you they're going to show you different data sets now, and they want you to look carefully at the patterns of these histograms. What are we actually looking for? Well, now, like in this graph you're seeing right here, what they want you to notice is that um, the tallest bar is in the center. The bars on the left and the bars of the right are exact mirror images of each other. And when that happens, we say the data is symmetrical or symmetric about the center. The left-hand side and the right-hand side are mirror images of each other. Now look at this one. Most of the data, I mean, the tallest bars on the far right, most of the data is to the left of that, and you notice the bars fall off fairly quickly, those heights. Here we say that the data are skewed to the left, or sometimes it's called negatively skewed. We'll see the significance of that later on. Then the other extreme is this one where, here's the tall bar and then they fall off very quickly as you go to the right. This one is said to be positively skewed or skewed to the right. Now, many data sets do not fall into any of these three categories, but when they do, we can gain some useful information out of them. So, and then, there's different degrees of skewness. I mean, some of them, like this one, has a very long set of right values up here. By the way, you notice how they use the word tail to describe that. And then back here, this would be described as the left tail. All right, so the words tail mean the extreme left and the extreme right side of the distribution. So the size of that tail shows us how much skewness there is in this data set. Now, we're going to here introduce the concept of cumulative distributions, which means we're interested not in the absolute amount in each category or class, but how many are in that class or below. Okay, in other words, less than or equal to. So here's the audit data. We're going to extend it now. I'll move this graph down here. We're going to have what's called the cumulative frequency. The cumulative relative frequency, and the cumulative percent frequency. So the logic here, the cumulative, now in the first category, the cumulative and absolute frequencies are the same. Now in this category, we interpret this to mean everything from 19 all the way down, not to 15, but to 10. So in other words, less than or equal to this category. So I need to include all of these values and all of these. Okay. So based on that logic, in this category, 20 to 24, I mean everything in that is in 24 or all the way down to 10, 17, then 29 down to 10, and then finally 34 down to 10. And this one will be 20 by definition because all of them are at that level or below. So want to remind you how I did this. These are equal. All the rest are done like this. The current amount, the current frequency plus the previous cumulative frequency add up to the cumulative frequency of each given class. So from here, I can just drag it down. They're all the same. All right. Now, these two are easy because all you're doing is what you did before. Oh, I almost forgot. Well, we don't need a sum here. The bottom one is the sum. So I'm going to have This is divided by I6 with dollar signs. And you notice how they continue to grow until they reach 1. The other option we could have done here is to add them as we go along, like we did here. But, I mean, I think this might be a little bit more straightforward. So you notice how, for example, this is 60%, it adds up to these two. This is 85, it adds up to these three, all the way down to the bottom. And then here, it's just a simple matter of multiplying by 100. Well, all right then. So that's our cumulative. And sometimes that's what we're really after. We want to know maybe, for example, what proportion of our audit time is 25 minutes or less, or 25 hours or less, whatever it was, as opposed to just the individual classes. Now, you can plot these too, by the way. You could, for example, what if I want a bar chart, a simple bar chart for my cumulative frequencies? Another Excel tip here, and this, again, I don't think it's the same on the Mac. If I want to select two columns that are not consecutive or next to each other, what I have to do is hold down the control button on the PC before I choose my second column. And you notice it does obey me. It's saying, oh, I see you only want those two. Fine. Maybe the command key on the Mac would take care of that. Control and command mean the same thing on the Mac and the PC. So now I can go ahead and insert. There you go. And you notice the bars keep getting taller. And eventually they have to reach the total, which is 20. I can convert this to a histogram if I want to. I'll just leave it like this. Stem and leaf. This is, you don't see this as much as you used to. Here, I'll tell you verbally what they're doing here. They're taking all this data, number of questions answered by the students, and it's this first column is the tens digit. In other words, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, 20, 30, 40. So this 9 means that this observation is 69. This is 68. This is 72. This is 73. So it's a way of visually seeing how many observations are in each category. I don't think Excel has this capability. I'm not so sure how important this really is. But it's another way you could represent data. All right, so not now. I mean, we're going to save it for the next session, but what's coming up next is 2B. Whoops. And in 2B, we're basically going to now be analyzing two variables at a time instead of just one. That's what really changes. So we're going to also be interested in graphs to show the relationship between two different variables. But the key to the second half of this chapter is that instead of analyzing a single variable, we're comparing two variables to each other. And so that will require us to introduce not only some new graphs, but some new statistical measures. All right, so I guess that will do for today or for now. And then I'll see you next time.